Thanks for coming. Ooh. My name's Ted Hope. I'm a film producer. How many of you here are filmmakers? About 10%, 20%? Oh, that, you know. And how many of you were here yesterday when I spoke? Okay, thanks. So this is supposed to be a masterclass. And for those of you that have attended these things before, usually you have somebody else sitting there asking you questions about your career and life. And like many things, if you were here yesterday, you probably know that I don't necessarily agree with the way things often are done. So I know what I wanted when I was a filmmaker, when I was a coming up filmmaker, starting filmmaker. And that's kind of what this talk is a little bit about. So if you feel you've seen it and done it and been there too long, no problem. You can leave when you want. I won't be offended. But I also think that what I'm going to share, although designed for the artist, also works really well for the executive. There's a version of this talk that I do for executives, kind of in coaching mode. But this is a strategy for long-term survival. So I've been able to make movies for about 40 years now. I know it's incredible. I'm, 30? How do I do that? But I'm an old guy. And these are the kind of lessons that I wish that someone gave me when I was starting out in the business. And it is ultimately what has become for me a creative practice, a strategy for managing the huge abundance of information that comes at us now. And how do you start to filter it? How do you start to find the nuggets to use as ideas for work, for better collaboration with other folks, for the things that you want to communicate out into the world? And it's based on the fact that it's a pretty brutal, I think Nick yesterday used the word savage capitalism that's at us. And how do you deal with that doesn't value you as a human being, you as an artist, you as an entrepreneur? How do you do that, and how do you find a way to survive? And if you haven't yet given thought to whether you're an executive or a filmmaker, what your lifelong creative practice is going to be, and how do you maintain that discipline to do it, I think you're going to want to stick around, because you wouldn't have graduated from my film school without doing that. So if I had a film school, which I never will, this would be something that I would ask you to try to do. And we're going to go through those steps. The key in all this, the two core goals we're looking for, is sustainability. 40 years, I think that counts. I get a little credit for that. And to be generative. I've been able to be a significant collaborator on over 130 films now that I think bear my signature in some ways. I'm not the director. I'm not the author. I'm a collaborator. But I think I've been pretty generative. And that only talks about the film productions. I've had 3 production companies. I've started a sales company. I've had lots of failures. I've had a post-production facility. I started a groundbreaking app that was a total disaster. I ran a boutique streamer. I got to start Amazon's film program. I did a lot of these things, partially because I keep a lot of lists. And this will be a key piece of what we're going to go through. So this phone says I have something like 860 lists on it, right? And if you read my newsletter, which I hope you do, and I encourage you all to subscribe because it kind of has this in better detail, you'll see how I use those lists. But partially it's because, and we'll get to this, I want to try to always engineer serendipity. I want to make good things happen. I want to figure out how to do the magic that allows the impossible to be possible, to get movies made that nobody wants. Because ultimately, that's what I do. I find ideas that really excite me, that I actually know most people won't. I like a good fight. Won't get excited in the same way. And what I find is I develop a script that people don't want to pay for. I then have a project that people don't want to act in. Luckily, there's usually a director who does want to engage with me in it. But then I have a project that becomes a package that people don't want to fund. They don't want to program in their film festival. They don't want to buy for the distribution company or even sell for their sales company. But yet, somehow, once we get it made, that all changes. People say, oh, I really wanted to buy your movie, but I really wanted to be in your movie, but those are the walls we face all the time. People saying, no, I can't do it. And what I actually think I have here, and I'm going to try to do it in 2 hours, which means I'm going to leave a lot out, is how you break down those walls, how you put the cracks into those walls, how you let the light get in. I wish they had the title for my masterclass, but if you had the catalog and you saw it, this is the JetPack that you were promised 30 years ago, that we would all be flying around. This is how you can get in the fast track to have a sustainable career where you generate a ton of projects. I truly believe it worked because in my test kitchen of one, it's worked for me. So you're excuse me if I sit down for a little bit. I'll start pacing soon, I promise. And by the way, I'd like this to be a conversation. As my wife can attest, you have to work really hard sometimes to get a word in my conversation. So if you have things to say, raise your hand, and I'll try to pull it in, and we can keep it going in that way. My newsletter is Ted Hope at Substack. It's called Hope of Film. It's on Substack. It's free to subscribe. There will be a paying thing that kicks in because I decided, actually it's a day to celebrate, when 100 people had pledged to help fund it, I would turn on the special paid stuff. And today, the 100th person pledged. So that was kind of nice. So Tony Gerber. Yeah. So sustainability and being generative is really the goal, right? So how do you start to engineer from that? I'm going to go through kind of like 20 big ideas that I use for that, right, at first. And I'm going to then speak to you briefly about how I capture that and what the methods are. I can't sit down. So I got to get my steps in because, as you can see, I don't. So I'll do that, and then I'm going to try to get to the kind of big points of what you need to observe, both about our industry, life in general, and the world, to try to keep this as a sustainable enterprise. So through all this, I'll try to weave in a few good film stories, because I know that's what people like at masterclasses, but it's not designed exactly that way. So we'll get there. So first and foremost, like if I say there's a flaw that I think the film industry uses to hold us back, to not get things done, which is, getting things done is kind of how you want people to recognize you as somebody that actually makes things happen. The reason we don't do it is we don't actually think about the long run. We're all project-specific people. We have this genius idea, at least what we think smells like genius, probably smells a little differently than that. We focus on that individual project. And this might be very well the difference between a producer mentality and a director mentality. But unless you think about the long run while you're plotting this movie that you have next, unless you help people connect the dots to the next one, there may not be a next one. What is the average time between a first and second filmmaker across the globe right now? Exactly, right? First and second film, that's what I meant, yeah. Which also is often the amount of time that people have between children when they raise a family. So how many films for women directors, how many years pass between projects for most women directors? 7 years, same thing. That's a lot of time. You're not going to get all the work done all the stories that you have to tell on that. So how do you design your own system so that you can be more generative? The thing I've also found for myself is that, across time, the longer I last, the more opportunities I get along the way. So I want you to get all the opportunities that I got. So you have to last a long time. So think about that next time that you are just doing everything you can, willing to burn it at both ends to get that single movie made. What follows? How are they going to recognize that what follows is best for you? While I started trying to think beyond, I should probably share that for me, the way I kind of found this along the way, I'm sure all of you have experienced, you make a movie, it's exhilarating, you're totally energized, and then what happens? Everyone's gone. You thought they were your best friends, not just because you were paying them, but they go on to different things. It's depressing, right? And I was like, God, I don't want to have that downturn. For me, like the solution that I found, frankly, was pretty easy. Rely on other people instead of just relying on yourself. I've always had partners in what I do. We produce with each other. It keeps things moving. I always have that next thing. I find personally, and this is like a math for each of you to decide if it works for yourself, if you want to make movies on a regular basis, I find like what your goal is to get to 25 films in an individual personal slate. And the reason I find that math works for me is I find that I need 8 projects generally to get one project going. So because of the vagaries that come from cast availability, finance, strikes, other things along the way, I don't want to make one film a year. The way the structure is, it doesn't pay my bills to make one film a year. I have to try to make 2. And generally along that way, I'd be much more happier if I believed I could make 3, and hence you get really quickly to 25 films. I didn't start managing 25 projects. So if you haven't built that up, it's not that you've made a mistake. It takes like everything else, repetition breeds instinct. Instinct becomes, wisdom or just biology, and you start to be able to do it. So 5 films become 7, 7 becomes 10, 10 becomes 15. Soon you're have a slate of 25. It kept me out of that downspin of from one movie to the next and feeling depressed because I didn't know what was going to happen next. The other thing that I found was driving me insane when I first started producing movies is how much the industry changes every single minute or second. That it's always falling apart. There's always a new technology. There's always something else in favor that's through with whatever you were doing and developed. When I worked at Amazon, I thought it was insane initially, and must have been only unique to them, that every quarter we were working on a new strategy for what movies we wanted for the platform. We never got to the point where we actually proved the strategy that we had instituted previously. It was like, Ted, what are you looking for? Well, I'm trying to make romantic comedies for a Latinx audience of under the age of 18 and from between the ages of 18 and 30. Great, we're going to start developing them. You come in 5 months later, Ted, what are you looking for? I've got these great Latinx romantic comedies for folks between 18 and 30. I'm looking for, 5 minutes into the future sci-fi films that are designed for a humanist instinct. I don't want that thing. But you told me they would scrap programs really quickly. When I returned to producing, and I would talk to executives at Apple and HBO and other folks, what happens? Same sort of thing. It's crazy here. You wouldn't believe what we do. We change our strategy every 3 or 4 months. That's because, and we'll get into these changes, the whole industry shifted from being an ecosystem based on scarcity to an ecosystem based on abundance. It shifted its business goals from being one based on profit and revenue, profit and loss, revenue coming in, money, to one that was about audience acquisition. Different business goals had different strategies. Those strategies of today are about targeting specific audiences to become members of a platform. It's not based on revenue. And when they spot they have a targeted audience that's not engaging, they're looking for ways to bring them on, and they move super quick. You can't keep up. When you can't keep up, what's the best solution? Don't even try. Don't even try. Stay focused on your work. Don't ask me what I'm looking for. It's not going to help. I love that song. But that chaos, that change that's always there is a constant, right? And some of it is super negative. How am I supposed to survive when I don't have back-end participation on my movies? When I don't get to share in the success? I'm a big believer that for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. Didn't somebody say that once as a proof of nature, right? And it's true about our industry. And luckily, other folks found solutions of just remembering all things must pass. No matter the chaos, no matter like the downside, it's all temporary. The change is the piece that's constant. And keeping that focused, I found, in my own life, in my creative practice, really helped me learn how to deal with it, so I had better strategies. That was 3. Like the key, and a lot of this is on my newsletter where you can find it. I think the key, and someone asked me, can you actually train yourself to do this? And I think the answer is yes. Through all of it, you have to develop a thick skin. You have to have tenacity, persistence, perseverance. You can't, and this is advice I got from a taxi driver. When I called a cab in New York. I got in. He could see he had an angry fucker in the back of his seat, and he was like, looked at me, and he said, "Brother, don't let their bad ways change your good behavior." How do you get the thick skin when you're in a business of liars, cheats, malcontents, misanthropes, narcissists, all the people that inhabit, outside of you guys in this room, mind you, all the other people who inhabit our industry? How do you not let their bad ways change your good behavior? All things must pass. Find the good people. Find the good people and keep them close. I wrote a whole post on this with about 20 different things that you can do to help get that shell of a lobster when you need it. And it's easier if you just go on and read it. But one of the big observations that I was helped by Vanessa, my wife, to see that also helps me deal with the shit and the tough things that we face and start to find ways to maneuver through it is just the general idea of recognizing that the system will always dictate the work that we do, how people value it, what they expect to get from it. It's there. You can't ignore it. And you've probably somehow been indoctrinated by it, and it's affecting your choices, not always for the better, sometimes definitely for the worse. And you have to acknowledge that. And you want to find ways to start to maneuver within that space. You know, luckily, there's space between everything, and you will always have room to maneuver. But you have to accept that that's the nature of reality. Case in point, the greatest gift I got in the business was recognizing at a certain point, I'm trying to make sure I didn't tell the story yesterday, um, that and this is a bigger observation. I realize I don't actually have in my talk, so it's good that I fell upon it. That generally speaking, artists, the audience, moves much faster than the business or the marketplace. And when I recognized this, it became a little bit of an obsession for me. A lot of what I'm talking about, and there's a specific point on this, is about how we, as business people, as artists, develop pattern recognition for the things that we love, for where the business is headed, for the things we don't want to participate in, and things along those lines. And when I had that moment, how did I see that? How did I come to feel that it's different than what I was taught, right? Because at least in America, we're taught the market is always right. Business will move faster. And I actually think that is just an outright lie and something that's convinced you to behave in a certain way. It's a means of control. I made a movie in a manner that was innovative, that used new technology that hadn't been proven, and consequently, I made a lot of mistakes in the process. First walkout. No worries. I made a movie that was arguably the first fiction film cut on an Avid, a nonlinear digital system. And nobody had quite worked out the method for matching back from the video to the film. It took longer than we anticipated. Avids at that time, if you're familiar with nonlinear systems that worked on that, had a resolution that was called, that at that time was AVR3. They used it up until they reached AVR 99 and then discontinued measuring the resolution. The difference between AVR3 and 99 was that the pixels were about a little smaller than a ping pong ball when it was AVR3. That's what we cut on. We got the match back of the film from the print on the last possible day that we could submit it to the film festival. So it was literally a wet print, like people say you get a wet print. This was a literal wet print that came out of the lab and got on the plane, got shipped to Berlin. And we quietly, after the festival looked at it, called two film sales agents we'd worked with and said, will you take a look at our film? They both said, Ted, James, my business partner, you made something that's totally uncommercial. It's not going to sell. We don't want it. So, but it got into the Berlin Film Festival, so we felt pretty smug. And we took our last $2,500 that we had in our bank account and flew to Berlin. And first time I saw the movie was at the press conference. And I saw the 8 out-of-focus shots that have been preserved in that movie for the rest of eternity. You can see it because the film I wasn't banned from the Berlin Film Festival. The film went on to win the Golden Bear there. It was Ang Lee's second film. It was called The Wedding Banquet. And the reason everybody passed on the movie as sales agents were the same reason that everyone bought the film as distributors. They said, it's a gay film, it's a Chinese language film, it's a film that feels like it's from the 1940s, no market whatsoever. Why are you buying this film? Because it's a gay film, it's a Chinese film, it's a film that fit from the 1940s, has total market potential. The benefit that I had along the way was I was an ignorant, arrogant fool. And so James and I, when we would sit down with sales agent buyers, territorial buyers, and they say, oh, we love your film, what do you want for it? We'd say a price, and then I'd say, you know, though, we're only licensing it for 6 years, which wasn't done. Nobody did, because the television licenses were all 15, right? But all those people who are our friends buying our films were like, these jokers will be out of business in 5, like, who cares? Just tell them 6. So the first person did it, second person, every single one signed a contract with us for 6 years. So when we still had our company 6 years later, they actually had to pay again. So we had a film that was the highest ROI that year. We had a 43 times multiple, and we got paid twice 6 years later. It so happens that, just so you don't think it was like, oh, you stepped into gold. The number 2 film, 1% of their profit was far exceeding our 100% of our profit. That number 2 film was called Jurassic Park. So, it's apples and oranges sometime. But I use that story as an example because at that moment, I was like, wait a second. All of the experts, all of the industry people that I've met told me I was wrong. How is it that I could be right? How could this be something? And I started to say, wait a second. I've been producing movies for a little while now. I'm not really earning a good living. I just made a lot of money selling this film. That's the business. How do I move it? And at that moment in time, there was in America, we had New Line Cinema, which had their films sold on the independent market, but in output deals. There were companies that were sales agents that sold their films, but they didn't actually manufacture those films. They didn't originate those films. I was like, we're producers. We work with a lot of directors. Shouldn't we try to own the business along the full chain? And it so happened at that moment in time that the perception that you had distribution in the U.S., which came just simply from being an American, would help you generate your international sales. This world no longer exists, but that business at that time allowed us to make 45 films. We had $1 million in investment to start the sales company, and we owned half of those films outright, right? 100%, 22 of those films. It was an opportunity that existed for a little bit of time, but it allowed us to build a company that later was acquired with other companies and to become Focus Features, which is still there today, and start a company that, to me, is like the model of the future, but in a slightly different way. That company, Good Machine, was owned by myself, James Shamus, and David Lindy, and then 5 of our staff members also had significant shares in the company. If I was doing that all again today, I would do that as a fully worker-owned company, where everybody had shares in the company. One of the beauties that came out of it is for all the 45 films we made, we probably developed close to that same number of executives, some which lead companies like Film Nation and Focus Features to this day. Some who are incredibly prolific producers, Anthony Bregman and Carey. Some that went out to direct films like Edward Berger and Ross Katz and other folks, But it generated a lot of opportunity for a lot of people because we showed there was another way. None of us, to my knowledge, came from much privilege. None of us came with many connections at all, and we found a way that could be done. But the important part for today, right, on it is how do you look at something and say, this doesn't have to be the way that it's done. There is a different way, and I'm going to try to keep sparking and seeing those other ways to do it. I want to develop the filters that show me where the opportunity is, that show me where things are happening, that show me who the good people are, that help me deliver that. And that's what pattern recognition, when I speak about it, is. And I do believe that along the way, you can do this in many different aspects of your work. The key to me to design it for your own system is you have to decide for yourself what matters. This is true for movies, but it's also true for your life, and these things are interconnected. You have to have first principles that you won't give up in how you work for people, in the choices of material that you want to make, in the way that you conduct your business, in the way that you manufacture your art. And a lot of times people will say, oh, you're talking about building your brand. It's a sad world we live in. It's not about building your brand. It's about you determining what matters as a human being and how do you extend what's close in your heart on a bigger way to all that you do so that you feel good every instance, despite the fact you're in an industry with those liars, cheats, malcontents, narcissists, and misanthropes, that you're not going to let them change your good behavior because you are doing the thing that is greater than yourself, that matters to you in the biggest possible ways, and you know has the power to change people and the world. It's funny, like when I think about that, I had a little moment right there. I don't know how much you can see that, but it's because I remember the times people come up to me and say, you made that movie. That movie changed my life. I was so happy. I felt alone until you did that. We do that a lot. You all have the power to do that. And it's awesome, right? If you had to say what you valued most in the world, wouldn't it be something, the ability to change people's lives for the better? That's what we do, right? And I'm going to try to keep that at the center of my business practice, my artistic practice, my daily life, and my rituals. First principles. That's what I'm talking about, what matters for yourself. And if you were here yesterday, one of the things I spoke about is how we never set first principles for independent film, for authored film, on a global basis and for our communities. If we did, we would all accept right now that the access to culture, the opportunity to express ourselves through an art form is a human right that has to be protected, right? And so if you start thinking about those things for yourself, it's going to affect your behavior and the choice of the things that you do and how you work with other people. I have a long list of first principles I wrote out for myself. I suggest you, if you haven't already done this, you go out and buy 6 notebooks. One of these notebooks is going to be your first principles. And you want it to have extra pages because you want to write just a sentence on the page so you can look at it. You want to write them as they come along. The phone's pretty helpful to do that along the way. But I find if you have tactile objects that you keep these things in, it increases the value you feel in your own daily life, your devotion to those things. 2 principles that are closely linked for me that I use in my practice and that I try to keep focused on is to be always learning. How do you facilitate a practice, a profession, an industry, and a community where all participants are always reaching beyond their abilities and we are able to recognize what their capacity for the future is, not just their accomplishments and experience previously. And how do you facilitate the risk to give you those bigger moments, right? And to me, that's failure in a positive way. How do I fail better? How do I keep willing to go out on a limb, try new things with new people in different ways, and learn from those experiences? I have to be willing. I have to be willing to fail better and take those risks. I've changed my life a lot compared to a lot of my friends along the way. I have a partner that's willing to do that with me, but it's like get out of your safety zone, go to something else, go to experience where I'm going to become a better producer by the things that I do on a regular basis. How do you fail better? This next one is actually the newest thing I put it on my kind of overall guiding principles. And I have to credit, I think I used it also yesterday too. the playwright and screenwriter Lynn Nottage just kind of, and I'm not sure if it's the one that she credited somebody else to, but Pulitzer Prize winning playwright and screenwriter Lynn Nottage said, which was curiosity, not judgment, right? That you start to see the dominance of trends, biases, preferences in our cultural industries. And people say, oh, this one sells, this one doesn't sell, this one works with audiences, this one doesn't work with audiences. And again, I don't think that there's much truth to that. It's just ease of operation. It's efficiency to do that. And the more that we, particularly as producers, but also I think directors and executives, we start to remember that the audience is wide and diverse, that the best thing you can do, somehow I messed this up. Sorry, I somehow bopped my ear. Something was weird there. It feels better, that's good. Yeah. If we keep the curiosity alive for different perspectives, different aesthetics, different narratives, different characters, it becomes incredibly vast what we can collaborate on and what's there. So, like when she encapsulated 3 words, like a big idea that I felt like I was already trying to use and articulated a lot better than I had previously, I was like, I'm stealing it. So thank you, Lynn Nottage. If, what has been one of the surprising things to me over the last 10 years and how things have changed, I've witnessed that the global streaming era that we've had actually depends a lot more on an antiquated practice that I was fortunate enough to be part of, but is no longer part of our training. And that's what I call holistic producing. Those that know how to launch a project from the earliest stage and follow it through to, there's no end to its eternal life on it, are much more valued and needed than those who've become specialists. So generalists versus specialists. And yet, because of the high cost of living in the modern world, it's become much more difficult to have the opportunity to earn while you learn, to master those wide variety of skills. And the net result of actually diminishing education and training in a holistic approach means that our work doesn't get protected, and all of us are more vulnerable to predatory practices from other places in the industry. So this is something that you can do on your own. Better we do it in a learning environment from the start, and a work environment that encourages people to expand their skill base. But basically, hopefully you've said, okay, new goal, always be learning. What do I do when the years comes to an end? I try to ask myself, what is it I want to try to learn this year? What is the places where I feel gaps in my knowledge, and how do I access that? How do I help our industry start to supply those skills to other artists, to other business people, to other producers, so that we can continue to expand? Right now in America, documentaries, and particularly political documentaries that want to speak truth to power, aren't generally being acquired. They're not being acquired because the main form of distribution is global streaming, and those global streamers generally are in a wide variety of businesses, and they don't want to offend anybody. So they don't want to handle a movie that might actually say, human rights are worth protecting, or maybe we should have peace on earth. Because these are controversial attitudes that not all countries agree with. So they don't even touch these movies. Last year, at America's biggest market, Sundance, we had 1 documentary acquired. Excuse me? No, there was a couple. Mike Teoberti's eternal memory. There were a couple of films that were acquired before the festival, then announced at the festival as a common practice. But the net result to me of that, in looking at through all the, simultaneously with, say, the collapse of the exhibition market everywhere in the world, partially due to COVID, partially due to streaming, partially due to other perhaps predatory business practices, is that as a producer who wants to make sure my films have eternal life, I have to be prepared to produce the distribution of my movies. I have no desire to do that, but I have to be it. I've distributed 3 of my movies, so not a huge amount, but I've distributed 3 of them directly myself with teams that we built specifically for the movie. If I want to do that now, if I want to continue to make documentaries that have a level of speaking truth to power and deliver of politics, I have to build my distribution plan. There are a lot of experts that are out there that I can work with and collaborate with, but that's kind of what I mean. You have to be prepared to do that. The most dutiful artists that I know to their own work frequently haven't taken the proper efforts for the preservation of their own work. Any film that has been originated on a digital format most likely will no longer have an archive ready version of that film. Contrary to a lot of public knowledge, so to speak, digital formats do decay, right? That unless you are constantly moving your digital from one format to another, it's not going to be in the quality that you originated it in. Film, however, was a very stable medium and didn't have those same concerns. But all the folks I know who are committing movies on digital, very few of them are trying to move them to a film print for preservation purposes. When people sell their movie to a company for 30 years of license, most people don't ask that there actually be an archival copy of the movie generated and made. What happens when the rights revert back to them? They have no way to use their own work to generate wealth of any sort for themselves. The person that I knew most conscientious of this was one of my earliest collaborators, Hal Hartley. And he was super aware of it from the beginning. And one of the film labs in New York went out of business. And because I had knowledge of a history of film period, they asked me to kind of go through, and because they were just often labeled with the titles of their negatives, and could I match them to filmmakers? And I was like, wait a second, I made that movie. That's Simple Men by Hal Hartley. And I called Hal and I said, Hal, your negative for Simple Men is at Duart. It's going out of business, and they're going to discard it. He goes, no, it's not. I have It was. He had careful records of everything, but somehow this print was not where this negative was not where he thought it was. Hal Hartley, from that experience and onwards, has acquired back all the negatives, all the sound elements for all his films, and he's remastered them, and they're all available for purchase or for rental on his site in a way that generates a consistent income for himself. I don't know another filmmaker that actually is doing that. Yet, I would say it's a great best practices for every filmmaker to have. When you license your film, think about the future that you want to be internal. And make sure, like to me again, if I had a mandatory Bill of Rights for artists, not only would it have things like back-end participation is mandatory, data transparency is mandatory, it would actually say that any time a film is licensed for more than 7 years, there's a responsibility for archival efforts to be undertaken by that licensor. But all I'm trying to say is, you got to think big picture. You got to think soup to nuts. You want to find a holistic way to do this. It's a much longer conversation. I think I could talk about that for 6 hours, so I'm just going to move on from it. I talked about pattern recognition. I was super surprised when I went to work at Amazon because I'd seen what producers do and what producers built and the contribution that producers make to their movie. So when they hired me and they said, what is your first thing you want to do? I said, I want to prioritize the producers. Producers are who generate the most movies. Producers are actually the ones that help police the quality of films and elevate the work. If you found me 5 years later and you asked me my opinion of producers, and I fully identify as a producer, so I would say they're worthless. They're full of shit. Don't listen to them. It doesn't have to be that way. But some of that came from the fact that I found that once I started pushing back on producers about the cinematic opportunities that were in their projects, they had no clue what I really was saying. Why does it have to be this way? How do we make it better? What are you going to use on a visual scheme to reinforce your narrative elements? Where are those moments of transformation in the script for the characters? How does the world they live in reflect back upon them and all of these things? And people would just start to close their eyes like the man in the fourth row is doing now. So I was like, what do I do? How do I improve this, right? And I started working, with that goal. You say you want me to make your movie. It's a great script. I'm willing to dedicate myself to it. I'm not going to get paid in this process. I only get paid if we get the movie made. I want to dig in and develop a process on how to elevate the script. So that if you, the executive who wants to fund me on this movie of the directors that I want to make, you'll see that I've really done the work to interrogate my script, and I see all the opportunity in it. I started doing this about 3 years ago. It's a process. The goal of this is a process, a commitment to elevate the work. I tell the filmmakers, maybe it's 20 hours. We'll sit down, we'll have a few sessions. So far, it's generally for those that, because not everyone can complete this, and that's fine, that it's about 50, 60 hours of work. But it's a commitment that helps me, as a producer, know what you, as a director, actually want to make, why this movie matters to you. Why it's going to keep mattering to you for the 3 to 5 years it's going to take for us to get this made when we're not even getting paid. How are we going to do that? We're going to care deeply about it, and I'm going to care deeply about you and the work that you're trying to do to lift this project up so it resonates for a bigger audience. I call it a script interrogation. I communicate it as cinematic elevation, right? I always would do notes. I was an executive for 5.5 years, and 2 years before that I wasn't really producing. But as a producer, I did what most producers did. You gave me the script, I read it, tried to think about it better. I gave you notes, you listened, you implemented what you could do. We got it to a point where I felt like if I told you again I wanted to change the script, you might kill me, so I stopped doing that. But I found that the problem often was like we'd get to set, right? And I didn't know how you were going to approach the material. And you were worrying about whether the set dresser brought the chair that you had requested and changed out last night, and whether the wardrobe person was doing it, and the actor was having a meltdown in the trailer. You were having this. So who was going to help you say, you told me that this scene was about making a choice. And as far as I can tell, we haven't captured that yet on film. How are we going to do that, right? I have a good memory. I don't forget much. I forget some things, like appointments, but other things I don't forget. And if we go through that process, and I keep my notes, as you would expect me to do, and I do, then I'm going to help on set. I'm going to be able to say, this is what you told me the essence of the scene was. This is what you told me was your inspiration in that scene. Look at that shot from The Godfather. That's what you said was the inspiration. Where is that happening here right now, right? It's that sort of thing. One day I'm going to prepare because I actually felt like, wow, this is awesome. I would teach this process, but I haven't got to the point to do it. And people have said, oh, would you do it on my film? And frankly, it's so exhausting. You can only do it on the films that you know you're going to make as a producer. You don't want to hire an outside person. So the only answer to that, other than trying to find it for yourself, which I think is entirely viable, it is collaboration and then passing it on. So I'm trying to figure out how to do that better, and I will, eventually. Now, the reason I get so obsessed, where I wanted to give this talk about developing a creative process, instead of just telling all the stories of the scandal and actors who wouldn't behave on set and things like that are normal master classes, is that, I generally found that once I started this process of trying to develop my own creative process, it made me a happier, more generative, and frankly, better person. Do you agree? that it took a lot of my frustrations away, and it gave me patience and the strength to persevere throughout it. It helped me recognize that I was part of something much bigger than just myself and my projects, that we were in something together that was truly worthwhile. It made me feel like I was moving forever closer to the version of my life, of my business, of my world that I wanted to be in. Not the one that I was born into, not the one that I was given, not the one that I was observing, but I was taking action to bring it much, much closer. And through that was the kind of like realization of like, Jesus, I've worked with so many assholes. Some of them were incredibly gifted, perhaps even genius, along the way. But did at one point, after a string of movies I really loved but were killing me, that were horrible experiences in the making, I started to wonder, is it that the only way that you get to a great movie is working with such assholes? I don't know if I can go on working in that way. How do I do that? And I would argue now that if you actually put the work in to keep being a good person, engage with the work that you're doing the deep work that's needed to elevate the project, you'll make better movies. And I would actually argue you can actually see the movies that are made by good people versus the movies that are made by people that aren't. I believe the more we start to develop the pattern recognition for that type of execution, the more we're going to start to desire it. The more we're going to actually start to see it there. When you try to wonder, how does somebody like a Harvey Weinstein survive in the industry so long? Partially it's because we didn't prioritize good people, right? Now I say that, I say someone like that, I did make movies with him. He loved cinema, and he did understand what good cinema was. And he ultimately, in the end of the day, left us alone. But certainly not other people. And how do we develop that as an industry, those other forms of pattern recognition so we can see bad behavior when it's out there along the way and prevent it from infecting the other work that we do. But I digress. Forgive me. The biggest part of a creative practice, I think, is you ultimately want it to work to both confirm your understanding of the world, our industry, our community, your relationships, yourself, and the work that you're doing, and to disrupt what your opinion of that is. You want to be constantly looking, and I think this aids tremendously on the generative side of things, at how do you define this world, this moment we are in. I keep a lot of lists. I keep a lot of lists of the trends that are happening, of the things that define our world, that define our industry. How do you generate 150 slides over the course of 2 days for yesterday's lecture? I already had those lists pretty much prepared when I was like, oh, that's an interesting idea. When I look at lists about the world I'm living in, it helps me recognize the themes, the things that I actually think are relevant stories that might be because I'm telling it from a specific perspective or a specific culture. It will actually matter to other people. Because these are the moments we're living in. We all have the same inputs. We generally will have similar outputs unless we start to prioritize things in different ways. You have to see how the work that you're building connects with other people throughout the globe. I think I made one type of movie my entire life. I like to think I made international films. I'm not sure that is fully true, but that's what I try to do, is make films that communicate across the globe. I might make small films mostly, but they seem to resonate. And it comes from that form of observation, memorialization, and then implementation. How do you see the world that you're living in, recognize it for what it is, capture those details, and see how it influences your work? It's kind of like the script method. It's kind of, to me, interrogation, whether it's at your script level of how to elevate it higher, or interrogation of how to lift, interrogation of the place that you're living in so that you can mine it for other sources to generate your own work. That I find no shortage of ideas, of story worlds, of characters, of places that I want to make movies about. That's not an issue at all. I feel, I don't give or take, average life expectancy for someone out of shape as I am. I've got 15 years left, maybe. I should be able to make 20 more movies. I probably will need to develop 50 or 60 projects. I got it. I don't need anything more. I know what those things are. I found them. Now, I also want to make movies about the world that I live in that are profoundly now, so I'm always looking for one to bump the other one out along the way. And, that's a serious action when you say, I've invested my time and capital in this movie I'm not going to make, even though we haven't brought it to the starting gate. How am I going to do that? I'm going to do it because I know how it fits in to the bigger picture, because I've been working really hard to try to determine what matters and where we are right now. Yep.
If you're always thinking of what matters to people now, do you think that creates movies that in 20 years won't be relevant?
Not at all. I love looking at. Does everyone hear the question? The question is, if you're always thinking about what matters now, does it mean your movie will be irrelevant in 20 years? And I love specificity. To me, if you want to make something universal, make it super specific, right? So my lesson learned from when I made The Wedding Banquet was I wanted to make every film in Chinese and on a gay theme. I didn't follow through on it, but it would have been a wise thing to do. But it was really about the fact that it was a specific culture and time, right? At that time, there hadn't been a same-sex, male-to-male kiss in Taiwanese cinema. It hadn't been shown on the screen, somehow, right? But that defines kind of the moment in time that the movie was there. Now, what I find, so I'm talking about defining the world. I'm talking about trying to get specific in the opportunity in your script. I'm talking about how do you engineer serendipity and know the different things you want. But am I talking about cinema, right? I'm so talking about cinema. How many people in the room, for themselves, just as an exercise, have tried to define what is great cinema in 20 words or less? I see maybe 1, 2, 3, right? Fantastic exercise. If you want to go to a therapist, say, and ask them what their practice is and what they're trying to do, and they can't define what they want to do with your mind and spirit and entity, are you really going to work with them? I want to work with all of you here, but I want you to know what you're doing. I want you to know what your North Star is and what you're aiming to. I think not only do you have to define cinema for yourselves, and it should be something ever-changing, both in a short form and in a longer form, because it will tell you what you're trying to do, you also need to define what those qualities of better cinema is. What is it that elevates the good into the great? When I met Vanessa, I had been invited to be on the jury of the Sundance Film Festival. We hadn't really started to date, and I asked her to come with me. And she was like, "What, are you kidding me? We haven't even, I'm not coming with you to Sundance." But as a result, I called her on the phone every night. And on the jury, filled with great people, Maggie Gyllenhaal, Daniel... Maggie Gyllenhaal was on the panel. Lisa Chilidenko was on the panel. Fred Elms on. Like we had good people on the jury. When we start talk about this film versus that film, we had no common ground. Most of us, not only was the language different, but most of us hadn't determined yet for ourselves what elevated a project from mediocrity into magnificence. And I found this kind of surprising, so I started talking to Vanessa about it. It was a good conversation to try to help her, try to get us to decide if we were going to be aligned in life in a bigger picture. It was a conversation that lasted for 2.5 or almost 3 years, right? It took us a long time. That initial list that I built had 32 qualities on it. You can find it if you Google it. What I found, not that I compare myself, but I like this as a side note, this same experiment was done by Beethoven, by Bach. They did 32 variations on an insipid waltz, and they created something magnificent to try to lift it all up, right? I kept going. Not that I like to win, but I do like to win. So I keep trying to find those things. And what I found by memorializing such a list and those sort of things, it kind of became almost like a mantra, right? That when I was reading a script and I was saying, this isn't working, I could fall back on what I was looking for. When I was on set and the scene wasn't going the way or the performance was, I could recognize much faster. I was developing pattern recognition for the things that I wanted along the way, and I could actually kind of give the note of what I thought we were lacking. Same thing editorially. Same thing when I was buying films and looking at completed films. I was able to reach an opinion much faster with more speed that I had more faith in along the way. If you're coming to my film school and you expect to graduate, you have to develop your own list of the qualities of better film. Take your time, use a notebook, put them in the notebook, keep the notebook in eye view next to the one of first principles of your qualities of better film. Ultimately, what all of this starts to become, like lessons we get from different people. I told you the one from the cab driver. One day I was at I think it was like at the Cinema Eye in Norway, and I was sitting next to somebody from NASA, right? Space program. And I was like, wow, I never met anyone from NASA before. What is it that you do? And he said, I manage complexity. I was like, hey, that's what I do too. Maybe I can get us to the moon. But I think that's what a filmmaker's job at any sort of thing. They say the average number of decisions on set every day is over 10,000 that somebody has to make. You say you're a director. You say you're a producer. Producer might make half those number of decisions. How are you going to have a process where you're making 10,000 decisions a day unless you've done a little bit of work in advance, right? We want to come up with these systems so that we can reach the right answer quickly, right? This is all what pattern recognition is about, and it's all about managing complexity. But because we're in a cultural art form, we actually want to outdo NASA, right? They just have to get to the moon. But we want to manage complexity and render it into simple beauty. That's what we're trying to do. That alchemy, that poetry, that thing, how do we do that, right? You have to determine the things that matter most to you. Boom. Okay. I stand corrected. I'm not 100% sure that's where we were, though, but, you know. The key, and this is like another exercise that I think you all should begin doing if you haven't done already, is, and it's really part and partial also to the question of longevity, perseverance. How do you stay going in such a savage world? Is you need to know in the widest way possible all the things that you love. You need to capture this. You need to be able to feel it and spot it every time. These secret symbols and signs that are telling you that this is the place for you to be. I suggest the next time you have an hour, you sit down and you try to write down on a single page of paper, different page of paper for each item, the things that you love. You want to get to the first list of 100 things in 3 or 4 sittings. You want to have that in a book. Once you reach the 100 things, you want to go back and you want to write a brief description of why you love it. You're not to share this with anybody. This is for you, right? I have made, when I've taught, students share this, and I totally regret it. Do not ever see what other people love. Keep it all to yourself. But I have found that once I started doing this, I found the things that I cared about in my scripts, in my movies, in my daily actions, much more regularly. I started spotting it quicker. And I started to feel that this industry that was filled with all those people that I didn't really like to be around was also filled with many people who were my allies, who also cared about some aspect of the same things that I did. And somehow I felt like I was starting to spot them much quicker. And I found ways to communicate with them why we should work together faster. So that's another exercise. And it's an exercise that, to me, plays very key into that question of longevity and perseverance. Because ultimately, we're a film industry of builders. But nobody wants to do the maintenance that's required. If you're a landowner, you know you need the maintenance man there to fix the toilets and fix the plumbing and repaint the walls. And you, and only you, are the person that can do the maintenance for your own career, right? That it's taken a long time for the film industry to start to wake up and see that the things like the loss of River Phoenix and the loss of different actors and directors and artists that we never met are due to our complete neglect of mental health and other things along the way. How do you keep inspired and wanting to go forward in a world that is your job is to listen to know time and time again? What is the producer's job? My job, often, in the most simple way, is to knock on 200 doors and say, will you give me money for the movie, and have that door slam in my face. And I have to pick myself up and say, I'm going to do it 201 times, and when I come to your door, I'm going to be fresh as a daisy, and I'm going to be like, you're the first person I come to, and when you say yes, that's all I ever needed to do, because no one's going to know that I had the door slammed in my face 200 times. It's going to be like, oh, Ted, you had such an easy time. You met this man, and he said yes, right? And, you know, But how do you manage that? That is maintenance. That is like developing that thick skin, the perseverance and persistence, and finding the practices that keep you going strong and say that despite the fact that nobody wants what I've been selling for 40 years, I'm going to find a way to get 130 movies made and feel really damn good about it. Part of that I think becomes beyond ourselves, like once you start to say, like, I'm going to find the way to maintain a long, healthy career, you start to simultaneously deliver ways of better collaboration. I don't know about those of you who went to film school, and I don't know about the film school you went to, but did they really teach you how to collaborate better? Was that something that was core? Well, I can tell you, like, every single movie that I made got lifted by the team, not by the author, by the team, by the way that we all work together. What is the most simple tool that I found to collaborate better? It's what I referred to previously. I'm going to stop basing it on your experience, on your track record, on what you've accomplished. I don't want that. I want to be able to look at you and say, I can see what you're becoming. I want to see where you're aiming to. How do I see the potential and not just the accomplishment? And how do I see when I'm casting my team of collaborators, not just to see what the work they've done before, but the work they're truly capable of in this environment and in this way of working? How do I see the becoming? It's the same sort of thing that I'm talking about the business. How do I develop pattern recognition for what's coming, for what the things that I love, to bring those things closer to me? How do I see the next iteration along the way? You have to first say, like, I'm done with doing it one way. I want to be doing it another way. And I'm going to try to look and find those ways. I think that there are prompts and different little things that you can use to see where potential is. But that's a longer, world's moving underneath my feet, a longer discussion. Beyond that, you have to create the proper setting. You have to create the proper incentives to get people to work, to get them to reach beyond, to know that we're capable of something far more than what we've done before. I think the way to do that is actually stop necessarily always aiming for that North Star, but also look at the small incremental changes that that's possible. I think every single day of your life, you are capable of bringing an operational improvement to some process, to some space in your life, to the things that you do. You can find those little improvements and you can energize your entire team to be activated in that way. And when you see that you can do a little thing like saying, well, we have the hospital on the call sheet, how come we don't have the rape crisis center also on the call sheet? Or we have the fact that it's night or day, but we don't actually say the script the script day or night that it happened on the page. Certain things were done one way for a long time, and it took them forever to do the other. Doctors throughout the world resisted having a sign posted in the operation rooms telling them to wash their hands. Don't tell me what to do. I know what to do. I know to wash my hands before I go into surgery. But when they put that sign up, the rate of infection dropped 80%, right? How do we start to do this? I'm sure you're all avid followers of competitive hot dog eating. So you know this other story about Kobayashi, right, who's the champion competitive hot dog eater, who before he came along, we thought you could only eat 40 hot dogs in a span of, I think it was 5 minutes. We thought that was the natural human level. But he had the new method where you break it up and you wash it with water and you swish it around and so on. And he broke that glass ceiling. And all of a sudden, not just he could eat 60 hot dogs in that span, but everyone who was a competitive hot dog eater recognized that that was a fake limit and they could burst through. You have to show people that the little improvements to life, like competitive hot dog eating, are capable. But once we start to say just the little things, like I'm going to Well, when I was a PA, I had a tendency to get a bored look in my eye. I've seen a few of you with that today. And luckily, I had someone come up to me and say, "Do you know what your job is?" And I was like, "I think I'm supposed to make sure that nobody enters the shot." "No, your job is to make sure that problems don't exist, that problems don't happen. Look around you right now and see all the opportunity for a disaster. Try to spot that, right? Don't let it happen, right?" And then I started to realize we didn't put a rubber mat over that cord. You know, that we had the paper cups too far away from the water bottles. There wasn't a garbage bag in the bottom of the can, so when you pulled out the garbage, you didn't have to look for the next garbage bag. Like those little things that eat up our time if we don't do it are around us all the time, all the time. And we can start to bring change by simply trying to say operational improvements are important. And then when people see that you actually can spend your life making things better for other people and for your team, they start to recognize that we don't have to accept the status quo of how it is and that change is possible, and we ourselves, as individuals, make a difference in every single thing. That's the set that you want to have. That's your team that you want to have. Those folks who say, "I'm here to make things better." That's why I make movies. I get to do that every single day. We gather in environments like this. We learn and we see. We're around incredibly smart people who get things done. That's what filmmakers do, who have lived a disciplined life to elevate the things that they love most in the world. Yet, each new generation has to learn it for themselves, right? How come we don't actively work to create best practices for every aspect of the things that we do and work to share those things? They're around us, they're captured, they're easy to capture, they're easy to share, but they're all cloaked still in secrecy. When you start to have a team on your film, on your production company, on the corporation you work with, and you initiate both operational improvements and best practices as something that is a priority, the quality of the execution and everything else is going to be lifted up. You will not be held back like all those other hot dog eaters were before Kobayashi arrived. You will be able to eat over 40 hot dogs in 5 minutes. All of this, comes down to a few little simple things of how do we learn how to resist the status quo, not just accept that we're in this place, that we're in this rut, that we're in this way of doing things. I got to meet the woman that worked with Spike Jonze on making the movie Her. And Spike is somebody I've collaborated with before. He has, certain unique ways of thinking and working, and some challenges along the way. So to write the script for Her, he needed a partner there to capture all of it. And and I asked her about what the practice was. She said she would read back something to Spike, and Spike always would say, "But does it have to be that way? Is there another way that it could be? How come it has to be that way?" That was it. Every single spot was that question. Why does it have to be that way? That film, I think, won Best Screenplay. It was a pretty unique and special movie. It's one example of just like saying every single thing, it doesn't have to be this way. If you want movies that are distinct in the marketplace, if you want movies that stand the test of time, don't let them be like other people's movies. It doesn't have to be this way. Resist the status quo. In doing this, in every single thing, if you follow this sort of process, right, what I think you're ultimately doing for yourselves is engineering serendipity. You are making sure that the good things have the potential to happen because you've already thought them out. You already have a solution. When I was just starting out as a producer, I was making a movie in Texas, And we finally built our crew, and we were getting ready to go, and my entire crew virtually, except for my heads of department, left for a better paying job. I was making a Hal Hartley movie. They jumped onto a Chuck Norris movie. We had to replace the crew. One day I'm driving, I don't know if you've ever lived in Houston, Texas, but it's a city that grew without proper planning. And so it has these clovers and all these kind of wild highways with entrances on the right and the left and curves that aren't properly banked, so you actually have to brake and other things like that. And as we drive to set, I see all the sirens, I see the crash cars. I'm like, holy shit, what happened there? I get to set, and I learn that 8 people on that Chuck Norris crew died in a car accident. But I learned later that the crew, that the producers on that movie didn't tell the crew what happened. My time sequence a little that night when I get back. The producers did not tell the crew that they lost members of their team on the way to set. I was like, holy cow, I will never do that. I want to find learning opportunities that don't require crew members to die for me to have better practices, right? The time to prepare for that is long before you'll ever enter that situation. The time to prepare for the best movie you're going to make, which isn't going to be your next one or the one after it, might be 5 down the road, is today. Today is the day that you want to prepare for all the things that are yet to come. And you're going to try to figure out how to unlock all of that serendipity, all of the good things, so you're not just having to deal with those 10,000 bad decisions that have to be there, but you're elevating the project each time. You've done the work because you and your producer or you and your director did that script interrogation. You found all those things. When the light falls in a certain way and it hits that, it resembles that Caravaggio painting that your director said was their inspiration, you're going to point it out and you're going to move the camera to capture that sort of thing. But you won't know unless you did the work before. You think that I'm coming to the end, but all of this is a bit of a bigger practice that I want to encourage you to do. And I'm going to do a short summation because I didn't even get to the status of today. Another thing, like capturing all the things that you love, like defining the qualities of better film. And I think that if you really want to feel the way that I do, which is that my best work is ahead of me, I'm more inspired today than I was when I started my first company or made my first movie or my 5th or my 10th or my 30th. I know my skills are better. I know that I work better than I used to. And I actually know where I want to kind of drive things to. And it never stays the same. It is always changing. It is in a midst of a mess of chaos, constantly changing. But I have a pretty good handle on it because I've been working 5 years now on building my roadmap to utopia. And I want to encourage you all to do the same because it's really been a transformative thing for me. What is a roadmap to utopia? It's all that I want in this world. Every single policy, every single action and behavior tendency, it is the things that would inspire me to try to make another 150 movies before my expiration date. Done. That's it. See y'all later. But I do break it down to like every category I can possibly think of, and I found it is another one of those tools that have helped me spot the things that I want and I want to move to, and find my allies quicker, and thus make my decisions quicker. So I think I shared 10 things that I recommend that you do for homework, and I'm going to just recount them because there's a big test coming up, and if you want to graduate, this is what you need. You're going to build your book of love of all the things that you love and why. You're going to define your first principles of what really matters and what your values are. You're going to embrace a practice of consistent observation and capture and revision for all the things around you, for your world, for your community, for your industry, for your company, for your individual practice, for your relationship, for yourself, and the future movies that you want to do. You're going to try to observe what those elements are. 4, you're going to define your qualities of better film, the things that elevate the good into the great. You're going to aim for 32, but try to get beyond that over time. You're going to give yourself 3 years for that one. You're going to say, what I'm trying to do all the time is develop the pattern recognition to spot the things that I care about and don't care about faster as a sorting principle on a quicker way. You're going to embrace a practice of operational improvements of everything around you and your team and how you do that. You're going to share the best practices that you source. Oh, I left this one out. I'll bring this final thing. You're going to develop a maintenance method to help you persevere in the long term. And you're going to build a roadmap to utopia. What I left out, and along the way, I'm not quite sure how, and I'm going to have to fix that, is you also are going to do what I did yesterday, is you are going to try to spot a host of dangerous ideas, things that disrupt things a little bit, but don't destroy things, that you are going to share of other ways of thinking than the way that our community, our industry, our collaborators consistently do. We play it safe, and because we play it safe, we all start to conform, both in our artistic and business expression and in our own lives. And by pushing these dangerous ideas out there and be willing to talk about them, they can be things you love and things that you don't love, you're going to facilitate a constant change and growth within our industry. So add that to your practice. Build your list of dangerous ideas. I look forward to seeing you somewhere along the way in the next 6 months, and I'll share 5 of mine if you share 5 of yours. So, all right, I can answer a few questions. Like, that's 2 hours. Do we have a few? I'm going to go back there first. Identify who you are. Say.
My name is Ping Yu. I'm a producer from Taiwan.
Excellent.
Yes, and my question is...
We fly to Taipei tomorrow. We do.
You fly to Taipei tomorrow?
Yeah.
Okay.
Will you be there?
I will probably be here. Yeah.
We have to finish the mix, but go on.
Yes, and my question is like how you keep your love for film. Like everybody say, like marriage is the graveyard of love. So deciding to work in the film is like you married the film itself. Like it used to be the personal, like, emotional, and you know your motivation. That's pure. You love this film. You don't love this film, but now I can never trust if I love this film or not. I can never trust my motivation of watching a film. Is that I'm interested in this film, is I really appreciate this film, or there's an agenda that maybe I want to know why people want to watch this film, why this film is being made. And I'm still like very early in my career, and I already have that feeling. I want to know like how to prevent the worst scenario to happen, like divorce with film.
Well, I think you're blessed with one of the great skills of producers, which is you have to have a dark side. You have to imagine the worst things possible. My greatest love will go away, right? Really great way to prevent bad things from happening. Also a way sometimes to make bad things happen, so be careful. But I found it really shocking to me when I entered the business that once I developed a little bit of a track record, people wanted to marry me around movies. We'd meet for a first meeting, and they'd say, I want you to produce your movie. And I was like, I don't even know who you are. I haven't spent any time with you. How can I facilitate that process? I wrote a book called Hope for Film. I hope people read it if you haven't read it. But it was really partially there so that people would know me better. I tried to be honest in all that I shared, so you'd have an authentic, experience of who I was and whether I was the right person to produce your movie or as a collaborator. That alone, if you feel that the person has done the work, and that means like you are doing the same sort of work, to say, are we going to be able to work together for a long time, is going to help keeping a positive attitude through of the potential of what the project is through the project. The way I keep my love for cinema going is what I just shared. Ultimately, it's a rigorous process. I want to keep feeling more inspired all the time. I want to look and say, what am I most excited for? Is a new generation of filmmakers expressing the things that I feel in new ways that I never could possibly do that myself, right? I want to find those people, and I want to help empower them to do that work. All of that, like that question of like keeping that piece intact, these are things that I love. These are things that I value. These are processes that I believe help, along with curiosity and not judgment, right? That I want to find those people that do things differently. I'm not going to say just because we don't agree, it's not worthwhile, right? I want to see where that takes me. The ground moving beneath my feet, the shifting sands, the fact that I haven't got a JetPack yet to move on is super helpful, because ultimately I have to say, like, this is new. This is new. And I know, because I work to constantly change and grow, that I can actually do the opposite of what people think is insanity, right? People think insanity is doing the same thing and expecting a different result. But I find that that's life, because I'm not the same person I was yesterday. I am actively learning and growing, and I'm witnessing my world around me shift and change. Not the same situation, not the same person. I can do the same action and get a different result. That's super exciting. That's like miracles. So like I'm going to play that game for a long time because it's fun, Here, so.
Okay, so my question is, okay. It sounds like you're a bit like me. You're constantly in meetings or flying somewhere or answering emails, or, you never have a free moment, and when you do, you just want to get a drink or something. So how do you sit down and fill in these notebooks and do this work? Do you actually take time to be alone?
Yeah, I definitely, the way I survived working at Amazon was learning to meditate. That was super helpful. But after I found a relative calm, and after leaving the company, I started finding that meditative walks and walks in conversation on specific projects were super helpful to me to find new ways and breakthrough. So I've always been what people find profoundly generative. It makes people ill to have a constant cadence of new things being brought to them. It took me a long time as a collaborator to learn that I shouldn't keep giving people good ideas when we haven't finished executing the ones prior, because they get incredibly annoyed of it. Like, do not bring another way of doing things to me along the way. But I found that if I don't always share those things right away, and I keep working and I keep working and I keep working, meditate on them and tease and define them, I do sharpen those ideas. Not necessarily in an equal proportion to my effort, but 100% maintenance requires a practice of peace, quiet, contemplation. I mostly try to spend my first 2 hours not saying anything. I do write. I write both personally and professionally. And I love that time in the morning to do it, and it gives me calm. And then throughout the day, I will 100% like, oh, this script's not working. I'm going to take a walk and think about the script without thinking about the script. You know, like that's all I really want to think about, but I'm just going to empty myself and try to see, and then see where I go and try to find them. That is so helpful to me.
Do you think, hello? Do you think it's healthy to want to produce and direct?
The question was, is it healthy to want to produce and direct? You mean both of those things along the way? Well, my wife left the room, and she's both a producer and a director. So I can tell you, it's to each their own. I'm not going to judge on it. I found I loved being an AD. An assistant director was kind of the thing I, in a lot of ways, enjoyed most along the way. But I didn't like being an AD on other people's projects, really, was what kind of like part of the problem. So I started producing. And the problem was, once I started producing, no producers wanted to hire me to be the AD. I think there's often a kind of challenge in a producer-director that to the degree that you're going to rely as a director to get hired by other producers, they're going to often judge, not be curious, look at you and say, are you going to be, second-guessing me as a producer along the way? And similarly, and I've seen this more happen, for the producer who has directed, the director often is feeling that wait, what he really wants to do is direct. I don't think there's necessarily that hierarchy, but society sure seems to think the director is above the producer. Once producers came first on the poster, but like it's that challenge. If you're going to be a producer and a director, you have to figure out how to facilitate an environment of trust and confidence amongst your collaborators so they don't think you're trying to do their job for them. That said, I find the best way of getting anything done is making sure that you can do everyone's job for them when the time comes. So how to do that with a quiet, gentle way. And ideally, like before I went into film, I worked in community organizing, and there was a mentor who said to me, the only meeting you ever want to have is the one that you already know what the outcome is. But you have to make sure that outcome happens in the room, and you haven't decided about that ahead of time. How do you do that, right? How do you make something like that happen? Quite often, it's that same sort of thing, and you see as a producer, I want to have this result happen. I have to make sure they all feel like it's their idea. So I'm not going to have a way that I have to take ownership or get credit for it, but I want to help bring people to that decision. I may not, like, the efficient way for me to say, this is what we should do, it's the best way, let's go. That's not going to necessarily lead the best results of saying, okay, we got to solve this problem. How are we going to solve this problem? Oh, that's a good idea, but that doesn't solve this. How we got to do this and we got to do that, and bring them to the collective decision so we did it all together.
Has it ever been not fun and not like your answer? It's always fun. And has it ever like I'm done looking for the fun of it?
150 times over. Like there was a period of a handful of movies I really cared a great deal about that I love how they got finished, but it was brutal and it was never fun in making those movies. The methods that each of the there's a reason why I think many directors have become exacting and demanding and kind of inconsiderate sometimes of the bigger picture around them, because in trying to make 10,000 decisions a day, you can't waste. You can't have slackers. You need everyone to be on, moving for that. But that often isn't fun. How do you develop like a different form of leadership and expedited decision making in a way that inspires and helps people bring in their better self. The fact that that's always super complicated and that's not easy is why you won't fall out of love of the process, because that's a puzzle that will never fully be solved because everything's shifting. And that's kind of fun if you can stay focused on that as the thing. One more question right there.
Thank you very much for sharing your precious insights. I really appreciate that. Another question
you.
that I wanted to ask was that you talked about the economy of scarcity to migration to economy of abundance, and revenue versus profit versus customer acquisition and retention and all that kind of thing. Where do you think the storytelling distribution is going in the way today? I think with all the mergers and acquisition that is happening, and where a consumer is like in a supermarket now, that a 1 week or 2 week old series is already, you've got to find them behind many shelves, and it's only about those that they are being talked about on social media, that you have the retention of that show, because there's so much of surfeit of stories that are coming out. Where do you see this going in the wake of artificial intelligence, machine learnings, and everything?
So the question is, what are all the ramifications to a shift from scarcity to abundance for film? And ultimately, I think you're tickling the question often referred to as like the tyranny of choice. And when we have so many options, what is lost? Right there, it's kind of the problem of the time. So I think if we need a nominee for the next Masterclass, you should use that as the subject. Ultimately, what I was trying to share was a strategy for abundance. With everything coming at us all the time, how do we improve our decision-making process so that we make the right choices? That's ultimately what we all want to do. We want to manage this complexity and find the gold faster in a way that we like the process of, right? We don't want to poison the environment with the chemicals that bring the gold to the surface. We want to feel that we did this in a conscientious way that left things better than we found it. And I think that it is all of that constant refinement. I think that when we have the fire hose, the assault of material, it develops different tendencies, right? So for all the talk about the algorithms and how much they decide, I believe that people, consumers, are also, just like our world, in a constant shift of change, and their desires start to shift. I do believe, and I encourage everyone, if you haven't, to read The Age of Surveillance Capitalism by Shoshana Zuboff, which speaks of how the internet is this wonderful tool for tuning and creating behavior modification. And I use wonderful in that it's absolutely not, but like we've welcomed it into our lives and it's never going away, and it alters our behavior in significant ways. But I think as people become conscious of things, they develop other practices. And I fully believe, as I said before, that for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. So I see, like when I go, like this year, my best cinema experiences were all what one might call slow cinema. We saw Satan Tango, 7 hours long, in a packed house, where I would say that I was at least 20 to 25 years older than the average person. And this was a film that generally people never saw unless you were 50 years old and a certified cinephile nut. Same thing with Uncle Boon Me. Same thing with Chantel Ackerman. Sold out audiences of young people who were excited to see movies on the big screen and stayed despite the fact the pacing was incredibly counter to what they had. because it was different from their experience. That's a small subset of New York and Los Angeles, right, who already is attuned to culture. It doesn't speak of the general population. But I think that people always want that different thing and that thing that defines them now and feels of the moment, right? That's I think, a real objective desire for everybody. So I'm confident that as much as things seem kind of stuck, perhaps in a downward drift to mediocrity and conformity, that there will be something that is opposite that lifts it up. And those things, they don't happen every day, they don't happen every year, but when they do, they are huge shifts, right? So as much as things fall into ruts, things also can change in a moment. And I find that really, inspiring. And so I think we're just still in, like, really the first piece of the era of abundance. And most people haven't tried to figure out, how to deal with what that fire hose is. And they take what is given. And the next stage is that we all start to develop practices that allow us to sort and make better decisions quicker. And that's kind of what I was trying to share. All right. Thank you all.